Hello, everybody. I'm so glad to see everybody back in your seats. You're following Paul's instructions so nicely. Good afternoon, and it is my great pleasure to welcome the Honorable Julian Castro to the NLIHC Annual Housing Policy Forum. Secretary Castro is the 16th Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. He's the second HUD Secretary in the Obama administration. We all remember Secretary Donovan, and we are very delighted that Secretary Castro has continued the tradition of coming to our event. The other thing is that he's the second HUD Secretary who used to be the mayor of San Antonio, which I think is a really wonderful, wonderful thing. So many of you remember Secretary Cisneros. So there's lots of wonderful things we could say about Secretary Castro, but there's just two things I want to point out, is that it's been under his watch that the National Housing Trust Fund rule has come out. And that the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule has come out. Those are huge, big accomplishments, and we're very proud of HUD for doing that and very grateful. But let me just say that it's under his leadership that the National Housing Trust Fund will be implemented, and we're watching carefully. Okay. We are very excited that Secretary Castro is going to discuss today a major announcement made by HUD around fair housing and criminal justice reform. We are deeply honored that he has chosen our event to talk about this for the first time publicly. So with no further ado, please welcome Secretary Julian Castro to our stage.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Well, first of all, it is fantastic to be with you all here today. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition is hands down one of my favorite organizations. In fact, I think it's fair to say that I've cited your Out of Reach study more than any other paper that I've ever cited in my whole life. Thank you so much, Sheila, for your warm introduction, but more importantly, for the amazing leadership that you have shown of this great coalition. Under Sheila's guidance, the NLIHC has become more than just a respected housing advocacy group. You've really become one of our nation's premier and preeminent forces for good. Sheila's remarkable 17 years at the helm caps off more than 3 decades of public service fighting for the folks who need someone in their corner the most. And Sheila, we wish you all the best in your next chapter in life. We know that your creativity, your integrity, and your courage are truly going to be missed. Let's give Sheila a big round of applause for all that she's done. I also, of course, want to salute Sheila's successor, who admittedly has very big shoes to fill, but I know is going to do an amazing job in her own right, Diane Yentl. Diane, congratulations. I do know this, that Diane is a tweeter, because I see her all the time on Twitter, and always with good stuff to tweet. And thank you for your amazing leadership, and congratulations on the new position and all of the impactful things that I know that you're going to do and the coalition is going to do in the years to come. I don't have to tell you all that this is an important time for those of us who believe that a decent, affordable home should be available to all. That was President Lyndon Johnson's vision when he created HUD more than 50 years ago. It was what President Franklin Roosevelt sought when he made housing a centerpiece of the New Deal. Affordable housing was even part of President Teddy Roosevelt's Square Deal. In 1908, President Roosevelt formed a National Housing Commission that for the first time recommended federal investment to create housing for low-income Americans. Those great leaders recognized a fundamental truth that's at the heart of this coalition's work. Our nation can't fulfill any of our major goals, from tackling inequality and improving folks' health to keeping neighborhoods safe and making sure every child gets a good education, unless we also focus on housing. That's because housing is one of the most basic needs that each of us have as human beings. A need that's as much about how we live as about where we live. Now, as you know, we have a lot of work to do to realize that shared vision of a secure home for every citizen. According to a report this coalition released just 2 weeks ago, there's a shortage of 7.2 million affordable housing units for the nation's more than 10 million extremely low-income families. That means that for every family that can secure a home, 2 families have to double up in a friend's apartment, or stay in a shelter, or sleep in a car. We also know that many Americans are busting their budget just to keep a roof over their head. 3/4 of extremely low-income families pay more than half of their income just for housing, leaving less money for food, for childcare, transportation, and so many of the other basic necessities, the building blocks of quality of life. We also know that it's not just the very poor who are struggling to make ends meet. Even Americans earning between $30,000 and $45,000 a year are finding it harder to secure an affordable home. Every day, the National Low-Income Housing Coalition and its partners look at these alarming statistics. But I know that when you do, you don't only see numbers and data points. You see the human stories behind them. You see a mother breaking prescription pills in half just so that she can afford to put food on the table. You see a father working 3 jobs to make sure his children have school supplies and that just maybe he can afford to let them go on their class field trip. You see folks like Carisha Bailey, whom I met in Miami just last month. Carisha is a self-employed chef and a single mom of 4 working hard every day to build a better life for herself and for her kids. That's why you fought so hard to help the Obama administration finally stand up the National Housing Trust Fund, a fight this coalition helped lead for 16 years. Congratulations on helping get it done. The Housing Trust Fund is the first new affordable housing production program in almost a generation. And it's the first to focus almost exclusively on extremely low-income families. I'm proud to say that we'll begin rolling out the fund's first grants this summer of 2016. More than $170 million in year 1, and that's just the start. It's going to mean fewer families will have to decide between paying the light bill and paying the rent. It's going to mean more working families can buy clothes for their children and make sure that their kids have enough to eat. And it's going to mean more families will be able to keep a roof over their head rather than being forced onto the streets or into a shelter. That's the power of your work. And I want you to know that our entire nation is extremely grateful for the work that you do. The National Housing Trust Fund is going to provide a big boost to another effort that my team has been focused on, making the promise of fair housing a reality for every American. That's exactly what the new guidelines we released last year are designed to do. More than simply protecting the housing rights of all citizens, HUD's new AFFH effort will also help local governments strike a strong balance between, on the one hand, providing low-income families with greater mobility and reinvesting in older, distressed neighborhoods on the other hand. Because we know that where a family lives matters. Groundbreaking research by Stanford professor Raj Chetty found that children under 13 who moved out of extreme poverty into a stronger community went on to earn 31% more than children who remained. So we want to get families into higher opportunity neighborhoods. And today, more than 40% of HUD's budget is dedicated to vouchers. At the same time, we want to make sure that the residents who have long been the backbone of working class neighborhoods aren't just priced out as new development comes in. So while HUD is investing more than $4 billion this year to lift up distressed neighborhoods throughout the United States, we'll also work with local governments to develop fair housing plans that prioritize affordable housing so that low-income families aren't left out or left behind. But to do that, we're going to need the ongoing partnership of this coalition's members. You've known the challenges for decades. You've seen them, you've studied them, and I know that you've worked to overcome them. So we're going to need your help to make sure we're making investments where they're needed most, and that we always do so in a way that protects our most vulnerable Americans. Last year, the Supreme Court affirmed what many of us have always believed, that the Fair Housing Act prohibits discriminatory policies, whether they're intentional or not. The disparate impact standard is one of the most powerful tools that we have to stamp out discrimination. And I want you to know that HUD will not be shy about using it to tear down the unfair barriers that have undermined the dreams of far too many Americans over the generations. Today, I'm proud to announce new guidance that makes it clear that HUD will use the full force of the law to protect the fair housing rights of folks who have been arrested or who are returning to their communities after serving time in jail or prison. No American should ever be discriminated against because of their race or their ethnicity, even if that discrimination results from a policy that appears neutral on its face. Black and Latino Americans are unfairly arrested at significantly higher rates than white Americans. According to the Drug Policy Alliance, even though rates of drug use are comparable across racial lines, black and brown Americans are far more likely to be stopped, searched, arrested for drug law violations than are whites. So when landlords summarily refuse to rent to anyone who has an arrest record, they may effectively and disproportionately bar the door to millions of folks of color for no good reason at all. It is wrong, and it has to end. Now, from my time as mayor especially, I know that many law enforcement professionals make their best judgment when they arrest someone. But an arrest only means that a person was suspected of a crime. And in the United States, suspicion alone isn't a sufficient reason to bar someone from a community. The fact that you were arrested shouldn't keep you from getting a job, and it shouldn't keep you from renting a home. And thanks to our actions today, it won't. Now, convictions, of course, are different, and HUD is fully committed to making sure that local housing providers can still set fair, non-discriminatory screening policies for returning citizens looking for housing. But right now, many landlords use the fact of a conviction, any conviction, regardless of what it was or how long ago it happened, to indefinitely bar folks from housing opportunities. When someone has been convicted of a crime and has paid their debt to society, then they ought to have an effective second chance in life. The ability to find housing is an indispensable part of that second chance. Past mistakes shouldn't determine future opportunity, and HUD is doing everything in our power to make sure of that. HUD's focus on ensuring that anyone who's had contact with the criminal justice system is treated fairly when they look for a home builds on our efforts to help more returning citizens move into public housing communities. To do that, we're working with a number of local governments to reunite folks with their families and to connect them with case management and other reentry services like job training. We've also made it clear that arbitrary one-strike policies that bar anyone with a prior arrest record cannot be used in public or private housing. It used to be that if someone was arrested for a drug offense, their entire family would be kicked out of public housing. That was a harsh policy, and it likely did more harm than good. Today, HUD is taking a new approach to these cases. Local officials will still have the ability to evict tenants when their actions warrant it, but we're working to make sure that families who pose no risk to community safety are not unduly punished. And finally, because we know that housing alone isn't enough, HUD is doing its part to help connect more returning citizens to jobs. We're partnering with the Justice Department to invest nearly $2 million to help young public housing residents clear their criminal records, help them find work, and have a better shot at succeeding once they rejoin their communities. You see, we want to make these same opportunities available to everyone that we serve. So we're also committed to strengthening HUD's Section 3 effort. Now, I know that many of y'all are familiar with Section 3, and you know that out there, Section 3 can seem complicated, but it's really quite simple. Every year, we invest billions of dollars in economic development for communities. And those jobs, those paychecks, those opportunities shouldn't be outsourced to others when there are folks who can do the work in those communities. The people in these communities should be on the front lines of revitalizing and rebuilding the places where they have long lived. In just 3 years, more than 95,000 low-income folks have gotten jobs or training because of this Section 3 effort. These are young people getting that first job and building their resume, their parents that are getting a fresh start, and they're hardworking Americans who are only looking for a chance to make their neighborhoods places of promise. That quintessential American determination, a resolve that continues to drive folks to build a better future for themselves and for their communities, has been a part of our nation's fabric since its founding. It's what spurred Mercy Otis Warren and Phyllis Wheatley to reimagine what was possible for women in revolutionary America. It's what pushed leaders like President Roosevelt and President Johnson to forge bold new visions for government's role in protecting the Americans who need help the most. It's what inspired incredible public servants like Cushing Dahlberg, the Dean of Housing Advocates, and this coalition's courageous founder, to make battling poverty and homelessness her life's work. And it's that same spirit that is at the heart of NLIHC's service. I want you to know that HUD is proud to be your partner, and we're committed to standing with you and fighting with you until the dream of overcoming housing poverty and achieving housing justice is realized for every single American in this 21st century and beyond. Thank you very much. You want me to sit down or you want to do it from here? Thank you very much. I'd love to take questions that folks have.
So, is my mic on? Mic. Okay, let me try this mic.
Okay.
Is my mic on? Can you hear me?
No. You might want to use this one.
Okay. Turn the switch. To on. Very good. Thank you. Can you hear me now? Okay. Well, I hope you recognize, Mr. Secretary, that you really excited a lot of people here in the room. And I don't know if you noticed, but there was a lot of amens coming from Dee Dee Gilmore right here in the front row.
I did hear those.
So we are just really excited about the announcement today around the Fair Housing Initiative for people coming out of prisons and people who have arrest records. And we just think that's, as I said to many folks who have asked me, and I tweeted out this morning, this is a bold move on behalf of President Obama and Secretary Castro, and we are very, very grateful. So the Secretary has a time for 4 questions. And let's remember what a question is. A question is something that, begins and ends with a, I am wondering about, and ends with a question mark. Now, if you stand up here, it's not going to help you. I have 3 runners. Where are my runners? I have 4 mic runners. I have Kate, Dan, James, and Alex. Okay. And I'm going to take 1 question starting over here. Kate, would you go to the lady standing with her hand up, raising her hand wildly? Okay. Okay, and remember, it's a question.
Yes, I
Not
have
a life story.
No, I'm not going to
Okay,
give a life
okay,
story. I'm just going to say where I'm from, Boston, Massachusetts.
Okay.
And I'm with RAB, Resident Advisory Board to BHA. The question I have is affordable housing. Who sets the rates for affordable housing? If you go to different developments that they're all over the place, where is the cap set for affordable housing?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there is some discretion that is involved in it. So you have localities that use different approaches. Also, I'm not sure if you're talking about, for instance, if a development uses low-income housing tax credits. There are different financing mechanisms that determine what the affordability might be. For the Housing Trust Fund, for instance, and Sheila and I had a good conversation about this, we're targeting extremely low-income individuals, which is less than 30% of area median income. Home funds are aimed at 60%, basically. So, there's not one single standard for an affordable housing development. It often depends on the financing that is involved in it. Absolutely. I'd love to follow up with you, and we can talk to you more and address your specific question. Where we see the biggest gap, and I alluded to this in my remarks, is really, and y'all have done this work, especially with extremely low-income individuals. But I hear you as well that in markets as varied as New York and then other smaller cities, in some places that have rents that are rising very quickly, what used to be considered affordable is no longer, in fact, affordable. And so we do have to be sensitive to that. And we have different mechanisms to be able to do that. And we'd love to follow up with you and get a sense of the particular circumstance you're talking about if it refers to the Boston area. All right.
So I'm going back to this quarter of the room and to Daisy. And Daisy, okay, thank you.
My question deals with the reincarceration coming back, the enforcement to the housing authorities to make sure that they do make a change, because they still feel that that is said but no change. So how do you make sure that they know there is genuine change? And I heard it from the top. I need to see it coming from the bottom.
Yeah. That is a fantastic question and really hits the nail on the head in terms of the follow-through that is going to be required to make sure that, as you say, we can talk about it all we want, but what matters is how this is administered on the ground. And so we are issuing guidance to our housing authorities and working through their industry groups. We'll be working with CLAFA, NARO, the other industry groups, and providing technical assistance when PHAs need it to make sure that they're enforcing this in the right way. I think the good news is that, at least from what I've seen so far, that many public housing authorities, they want to take a different approach, and they're open to taking a different approach. Now, that's on the public side. On the private side, the private side would be a private action. In other words, we're saying that the Fair Housing Act prohibits this kind of sort of blanket exclusion of folks based on arrests and convictions. That would have to be taken up by an individual in a fair housing case. So.
Okay, we're going over here, and Mr. Steele.
Yes, hello, my name is Michael Steele from New York City, and I'm board of directors of the coalition, and I'm here just to give you a message. I got some residents here from New York that has a lot of concerns, and they would like to meet with you at a later date.
Would love to follow up. I was just in New York about a week and a half ago. I know that New York just passed a mandatory inclusionary zoning policy that goes further than it ever has before. I know that there were still some concerns about that policy, but it is more aggressive. I was there because I wanted to make sure that we put a punctuation mark on that and encourage other cities to look at how they can use local land use to create more affordable housing opportunities. And I talked about this in my remarks as well, to do so in a way that doesn't displace the residents that already live in a neighborhood, but gives them the chance to also benefit from through the investment and revitalization of that neighborhood. And so striking that balance is very important, and we'd love to follow up with you on those issues. All right?
Okay, I just want to reiterate, you have committed to meeting with NYCHA residents at a later date, right? Okay. All right, I'm going to go into this lady who's had her hand up for some time. Okay. We need a mic right here.
My name is LaWanna Pettis Oglesby, and I'm representing JRAB out of Cincinnati, Ohio. First, I would like to bring you to something that we need, which is the final rule on Section 3.
Yes.
And once that rule is handed down, have you thought about a monitoring mechanism that can be used to ensure that the housing authorities and or contractors are adhering to what the guidelines will be?
Yeah, and we're excited about the rule. We anticipate later this year that we are going to get that published. Again, this is not unlike this issue of enforcement, a little bit different in terms of how are we ensuring there's accountability there. Right now, we have a self-reporting mechanism, so we are looking at ways of how do we make that stronger, so that number one, at the end of the day, more of the housing authorities put some gusto into their Section 3 efforts, right? They actually follow through, and that we can monitor that better and have the statistics. Recently, I got a report that showed some pretty promising numbers on an uptick of the use of Section 3. So I'm optimistic about that. But as to your direct concern, that very much is part of our thinking. How do we ensure that there's a stronger accountability and feedback mechanism to us so that there's more life to Section 3 and it's more effective?
Why not use Section 3 to be that Section 3 business to be that monitoring device?
Sure.
Oh, that's a good idea. Okay. So everybody heard it here that the Secretary has promised that the Section 3 rule will come out during his term, and so that means...
This is why she's been so effective over the years. She's just like lining up the commitments that I've made.
Right. But that's, like three huge rules. That's huge, and that will be a fabulous legacy for your
No, this is one that we're excited about and that we announced, in Miami last year, and that we want more housing authorities to take seriously. And so we're going to put all our effort into it.
So I was told to let you answer 4 questions, but we're ahead of time.
Yeah, we can.
So, okay.
Maybe 2 more. Or
Okay,
something.
we'll go right here. Okay.
Please come to Charlottesville.
All right.
Okay, here we go.
Like, you know, you had to take Chicago because we just met with Rom, okay? You had to take me. Okay, what I want to say is,
Wait, question.
we could deal with RAD and we could deal with Section 8. We talking about the one strike policy. It was put on the books in 1980. That is only was a rig, but it's also a statute to that. The state representatives and the senators put that on the books. It made it just like 36 years ago. How long will it take for us to get that change or get that amendment? It's been 36 years it's been on the book.
Yeah.
Every day we are suffering. For the last 3 years, we've been talking about Chicago and everywhere else. We're going to take it off the book because it's not fair. Now we got legal marijuana. So how long must we wait when everything else that got us in trouble is now legalized?
Good question. Good question.
It is a good question, and I think you rightfully point out some of these changes that have happened. So good question. I wish I had the answer to it, but I will say that we're going to do what we can do at HUD, and that's why we want to put out our guidance.
Politics is changing. The administration is going to change. Every time administration changes, people changes. It's okay to say we're going to do what we can do, but some of the things that's on the books that's pending, no matter what, that you know is the right thing to do, go on and push them through by any means necessary. Don't wait. Do what you can do while you're in office. Hope you stay there forever, but ain't no telling because administration changed. So don't wait, just do it.
No, well, that's what we're doing.
Veto everything. Veto everything. Come across your desk.
But
do
as
it.
to your question of what is Congress going to do, that's a separate question.
But
Yeah, we will.
But well, I'm going to ask a question. So I think you're talking about state law in Illinois, right? And so the question is, does this rule, I'm going to ask you a legal question,
All
which
right.
obviously you can't answer right here, because you don't have general counsel here. But anyway, so I'll just raise it as a rhetorical question. The question is, does this rule help create the arguments for people to get state laws that contradict with it revoked?
No doubt. I think both in
Okay.
terms of a private right of action and also as sort of a clear assertion on what we believe the Fair Housing Act says, I think this only strengthens the case state by state, and if there are any other federal issues. But as to what a legislature, either in a state or the federal legislature, will do, that's not in our control.
That's
Check your regs and check your statutes and other statute regs. You all had to adopt in order for it to be enforced.
well. Now he's saying that they
That-
are
But that's what we're changing. But we're
today.
yeah. Now
Today.
the guidance that we're putting forward is active now.
Today.
Yeah. So.
Today. Okay. All right, we're going to do one more question, and I'm going to call on Vicki from Missouri.
My question to Secretary Castro is, would HUD please commit to the same 90-day period every year for the NOFA to be announced? You have no idea what happens to the money, to the agencies. We could help people more effectively if HUD would just commit to one 90-day period a year. Not a 10-day period, just 90 days. It would help so much for all these programs.
I definitely hear you, and we want to do those NOFAs in a way that allows enough time to get the best applicants and do the best work possible. I wish that I could summarily commit to 90 days right now.
No, she wants to say, yeah.
Yes. It's noted for sure. All right.
All
Hey
right.
y'all, I was gonna say thank y'all so much. I know that a lot of the work that y'all do oftentimes goes unnoticed or is non-glamorous work, but it's work for the people who need it the most, and the people that we want to make sure are getting well served by your efforts, by this administration, that they have an effective shot at opportunity in our country. And so thank you very much for doing that work, all right?
Great, thank
Appreciate it.
Mr. Secretary, we want to present you with the 2016 Advocate's Guide to Housing and Community Development Programs from NLIHC.
Thank you.
All right, great job, thank you. Okay. Okay. And now I'm doing what, Paul? Okay, okay.
Basically.
Thank you all. Great. This is great.
Okay, we have a nice little break now. So we have until 1:15. Let's actually be back in here at 1:10 since we have plenty of time. So that's a little more than half an hour. So let's be back in our seats at 1:10. Thank you very much.